G'day, welcome back to Down the Shed with Byron. Tonight I'm going to have a crack at changing out my Panhard Rod bushes. Started getting the death wobbles around that 75 to 80 and jumped underneath and had a look at the bushes and found that they had shifted and moved inside the Panhard Rod and gave it a bit of a wriggle and you could see a bit of movement. So yeah, I'm going to try and have a crack at doing it without a press. Tools for the job: a couple of spanners, 19mm or 3/4, 7/8 or roughly 22mm, hammer, couple of sockets, a breaker bar will be handy, pry bar, pair of multi-grips, bit of Scotch-Brite or a die grinder with a flappy wheel, also a vise, or you can also use a decent bolt. Now this is a 10mm bolt, roughly 150mm long, a couple of decent sized washers, a socket roughly 50mm, or a couple of spacers that'll help you pull the bush in or pull it out. Otherwise a drill and a drill bit, and I'll show you that when we get to that stage. What I'll start off by doing is undoing the steering dampener, which is just by removing a little lock nut, then the nut, removing the retaining washer, bush, collapsing the steering dampener in. Then I'll undo the Panhard rod from the diff and we'll move on from there. And sorry, I forgot to mention, just before you start the mission, spray a bit of WD-40 on the threads and it'll just make it a bit easier to undo. Moving over to the driver's side, where the chassis is and the Panhard rod bolts up to, we'll spray some CRC again, just on the threads. So when we undo that nut, it comes off nice and easy. 7/8 or 22, and then this side here is a 3/4 or 19. Now with that bolt undone, it should just come straight out. If you do have any dramas, give it a tap on the other end with the hammer and then get your pry bar in between here and pull it out. So giving it a hit on the end there is okay, just be aware of your threads obviously, but you're only trying to initially get it to start so you can get the pry bar under. Now you can bang your pry bar straight underneath and pop your Panhard rod out. Removing the Panhard rod off of the diff end just comes off, but sometimes that center section of the bush gets like seized or rusts onto, what would you call it, the bit of the spindle part of the diff. This is where those multi-grips come in handy. So you just work it back and forth with a bit of CRC and hopefully it comes off, and if it doesn't, what I'd be doing is putting a small grind just down, again, we're talking this bit here. If that's stuck, you're putting a small grind just up and down here a bit, so you can just give it a hit with a chisel and it should come off. With the Panhard rod out now, as you can see that bush is warped. So that's the diff end and the chassis end. We'll attempt of knocking them out and see how we go. So I forgot to mention, maybe a block of wood. We'll put that underneath and we'll try and knock that with the hammer and see if she'll come out. Now knocking him out with the hammer doesn't always work. So this is where that long bolt, couple of spacers and washers work. Otherwise you can use a drill with a small drill bit and go around the outside of the bush. And even if you go halfway, normally you'll be able to knock it out. Right, so to pull the bush out, we want to be using the bolt, maybe a small washer, depending on which end you're using, pulling out. Put the bolt in, spacer or the socket, whichever fits on your bolt. Slide that over, and I'll show you what I mean by the 50mm diameter after. Spacer, nut. So just for an example, as you can see, a couple of simple tools, you can actually pull it out. Now that 50mm diameter that I'm talking about, I'll put up a photo of what I'm trying to explain, of what you need to have. So just remember when drilling it, try and use a should I say it again, take caution because you can damage the inside here. Like I've just nicked it, but she'll be right. I probably should mention just before I did knock them out, I put a little mark here, the big hole, and on the other end, a little dot, the little hole, just in case you get called away. Now what we need to do is just clean out inside this surface area. So you can use a bit of Scotch-Brite, some WD-40. You can use your die grinder with a buzzy wheel. Don't go too hard with that, but it's just to clean up any of the old rubber that's still living in there. Now you've got the area all cleaned out, making sure you've got no sharp edges or burrs. It's going to be a nice smooth finish. I like to use a bit of dishwashing fluid as a lubrication. Just lube up the bush. Give the whole bit of lube. Don't be afraid. We'll get that started. Put our bolt through with our washer and nut on the other side. So just for that last piece, just to pull the bush completely through, I used a 2-inch socket just over the end so I could pull it all the way through. And then I had to go back and forth a couple of times just to get it square inside there. Now we'll do the other end. Now with this end all sorted out, ended up being a little bit of a mission, just making sure you've got it in there nice and square. Now it's time to fit the panhard rod back into the car. What I start off by doing is put a bit of Never-Seez or copper grease around the area, slide the panhard rod back onto the diff, just has to be loosely. Moving over to the chassis side, lining up the panhard rod, may have to tap it into place, lining up the hole the best you can. Now fitting the bolt, you may have to move the chassis, get someone to steer it for you, or otherwise put your feet on the chassis and give it a push back and forth. Tighten up the bolt. Now it's got a locking tab just off to the right there. reinstall the washer correct way and the nut onto the diff end. At this stage, tighten everything back up, then reinstall your steering dampener, and you're pretty much job done. You can put a little paint mark across each nut and bolt just for a reference. Well, dirty thumbs up. I hope this video helps you out. A couple of things I found after I done the job is that I've got a bag of bearing races and etc. And I found that the inner race of the outer wheel bearing for a GQ, that bush fits perfect in between it. So if you've got something laying around that's roughly 50 mil in diameter, that'll fit over the Panhard rod section, and you'll be able to pull that bush through, and you'll be able to square it up. Parts I used was just a pedders kit, 540060, but I'll put that part number in the description if you get lost. Otherwise, if there's any other tips we can give others, put it in the comments, because it's all about helping mates out. Take it easy.